Folks, I'm going to give everyone just another couple minutes to get until we get started. In this room right now, we have a lot of people that know a lot about clinical trials. So we'll wait until a few more come in. Yeah.
So there's 3 presentations that are happening at the same time.
Right.
So it is possible somebody to do it as well.
I just want to make sure, because I'm looking at this side of the room, and most everyone on this side could teach me about clinical trials. So.
Yeah, there was a mistake on the whole evidence on the evidence works.
Hello, how are you?
And what about it? Yes, I was really like that. No.
Lisa, with my eyes, I was saying.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Seth Frits. I'm with Global Genes. I wanted to wait a few minutes until everyone started to trickle in. I know we had a room change. We were supposed to be in another room, but I think they wanted to record this session, so we brought it into this room. So I wanted to just do a quick intro into Global Genes and then, tell you kind of why I'm here. But I'm actually, I'm a patient with what's called tuberous sclerosis myself, so I actually have a rare disease very similar to CDKL5, and this is an issue that's very passionate to me. And so when I had the opportunity to present on kind of what clinical trials are, it was very important to me because in my community, there were no options a few years back either, and now we have a few options. And I want to share some of that with you. And so with that, at Global Genes, our core values are we're intentional, we provide connection, support, hope, and impact. And really our mission, our purpose is to empower, connect, or I should say connect, empower, and inspire the global rare disease community. We are a disease agnostic or an umbrella organization. We don't specialize in any one therapeutic area, but work in a broad spectrum. So we work across all therapeutic areas, and one of them is CDKL5. Actually, you guys are a member of our Foundation Alliance. So the reason why Global Genes was founded is that our founder years ago had one of her best friends had a child who had a rare disease, and through the time of working with her friend, realized that there wasn't really a lot of resources available in the rare disease community. And so, she started to dig into it a little bit more and identified that there's over 7,000, probably closer to 8,000 rare diseases that affect about 30 million people here in the U.S. and about 350 million globally. And so with that, we know that approximately 80% of those rare diseases are genetic in nature, and only about 5% of rare diseases actually have an FDA-approved drug. So it's very staggering, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you today. So at Global Genes, really our core foundation is to help people throughout this, what we call our arrow slide. And so as you'll see, beginning with kind of diagnosis and living with a life-altering condition, all the way to starting a nonprofit, to patients as biotech entrepreneurs, our goal is to help patients throughout that journey. And so everything that we provide to the rare disease community is provided at no charge to them. And so if you all have any questions, as I mentioned, CDKL5 is actually one of our foundation partners. And so if there's tools or resources that we can provide to you, everything's available at no charge. It's all online. You can call us. And it's something that we want to make sure that you have access to. So that said, I wanted to talk about kind of some of the key stages in the drug development process. And as I understand it, CDKL5 does not currently have a designated drug for it, but certainly some treatments for epilepsy and some of the other areas that affect the disease. And so what I wanted to talk to you about is kind of what's involved in the drug development process. So when we look at the drug development process, there's really kind of 4 key stages that happen. There's the pre-discovery phase, the discovery and preclinical, clinical and regulatory review. This process is a very long and involved process. So it's roughly anywhere between 10 to 15 years, or it can be even longer, maybe a little bit shorter. And it costs anywhere between $1 to $2 billion. So it's a very expensive process, and it has to be done very thoroughly, and it has to follow very strict guidelines and rules, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But one of the key important things that we need to think about as we look at drug development is the patients as partners in the process. And so historically, patients have been involved a lot later in the process. When a company was starting to do the drug development or starting to do the clinical trials, that's when the patients were getting involved. In the rare disease space, it is critical that we get involved a lot earlier in the process, all the way from basic research and helping to fund basic research and getting some involvement earlier on. In the discovery and preclinical phase, we want to work with patients to actually get, start doing some studies to learn more about the disease, what kind of endpoints we need to look at. Obviously, in the clinical trial phase, we want to incorporate the patients into the design and the actual participation in clinical trials. Regulatory approval and actually talking to the FDA about what worked, what didn't work. Reporting honest data is super critical. And then obviously into commercialization and access. We want to make sure that we can access the drug, that it's something that in the rare disease space the drugs are a little bit more expensive, in many cases a lot more expensive, and we have to work with our regulators to make sure that we can actually access these drugs and actually get them as patients. So as we talk about clinical trials, I want to talk to you a little bit about kind of who the key players are. So as we look at the key players, obviously the patients are one of the kind of the core groups of people. This is who we're focusing on, the patients, the caregivers, and those groups that are going to be affected by the drug. Then we've got the researchers, the healthcare providers, those folks are involved in it. Then you've got the US FDA, or in other countries it could be another regulatory group, but for the most part it's, in the US here it's the US FDA. Then there's the investors. There's people that are actually paying for that drug to be developed. So, this is a big group of people that, this is kind of the comprehensive umbrella of all the people that are involved in this process. So when we look at this, there's really kind of three what we call core phases of clinical trials or clinical development here. So in a typical, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about typical drug trials, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about rare disease trials and do them kind of on a side-by-side. And so as we look at a phase 1 trial, you're always looking at safety first. Every, phase of the trials, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, are always going to focus on safety. But in a phase 1 trial, we're looking at the trial population. It's typically a smaller number of patients. Can be anywhere from 20 to 80 patients, healthy individuals. It can even be a smaller number of patients than that. About 30% of those new drugs will not actually be successful in phase 1, so they'll drop out of the pipeline at that point. And then molecules, drugs that are considered safe actually will continue on to phase 2. When we look at rare diseases, it's a little bit different because traditional ways of doing a phase 1 trial don't necessarily apply for a phase 1 trial in rare disease, because when you don't have the number of patients, you can't do the big expanse of patients to reach out and do a drug trial. So typically you'll see a lot smaller number of patients in a phase 1 trial. Oftentimes you'll also find that the phase 1 and phase 2 trials are combined. And let's see. Well, you can read through the slide on this, but really at the core, the trial design is going to be a lot different. We're looking at smaller number of patients. The access and finding those patients is much more difficult because when you're going through that diagnostic journey in the first place, identifying which patients are actually going to be suitable for a drug isn't always the easiest thing. So when we look at kind of some of the clinical trials and research methods, some of the things that you'll hear a lot about are control groups, randomization, blinding, and double blinding, and just kind of high level what that means. A control group, when you're looking at doing a clinical trial, is the group that is not going to get the drug. They're going to get what's called a placebo. There's randomization. That means that some people will get the drug, some people will not get the drug. And then there's what's called blinding and double blinding. So that could be that the patient doesn't know that they're getting the placebo, or it could mean the patient and the provider don't know they're getting the placebo. So as we look at a phase 2 drug trial, obviously a much bigger population, typically affects, could be more than 100 to 300 patients, typically at least 2 years to complete. Phase 2 trials require a lot more. There's more clinical staff, more human participants, and a lot more funding. It's a very expensive process. When you look at rare diseases, they're often, again, adapted. So, they can combine a phase 1 trial and a phase 2 trial. There's smaller trial populations, which is one of the reasons why they combine those. They still have to follow the quality and ethical standards of a clinical research trial. And the FDA does consider the results adequate and well controlled for rare disease trials in phase 1, phase 2 trials. So there's kind of 4 key elements in the study protocol which are included in these pieces as well, which are the inclusion and exclusion criteria. Who's going to actually be included in the trial and who's not going to be included, and why is that? Is it that they're studying it on men only, or are they studying it on people over 50, or there's things like that. So they'll talk a little bit about inclusion and exclusion criteria. There's also specific endpoints that you're looking for. So if you're looking for general seizure reduction or that type of thing, that would be a clinical endpoint. So you might look at, we want a 50% reduction in daily seizures. That would be an endpoint that you might look at. there's also a lot of methods for conducting research, and we'll get a little bit more into detail on that. So this is an example of a clinical trial for eluciphase, which is for Markio A syndrome. And the trial included a combined phase 1 and phase 2 trial, as I talked about earlier. For 20 patients, there were 2 additional phase 2 studies with approximately about 30 patients involved. The phase 3 trial met all of the primary endpoints and was improved the ability to work. So the FDA did consider this a viable study. It was reliable. It did get approval, and so that's just an example of a rare disease trial. Again, that's a smaller population where they're combining phase 1, phase 2. So when we talk about getting patients involved, I mentioned this earlier on, and getting the patients involved early with some of the early discovery phases all the way through clinical research and regulatory. Well, here it's super important, and we talk about this a lot at Global Genes. How do we get patients involved? And without getting involved, we can't make the drug. We can't actually do anything in these diseases. So we want to get the patients wrapped in. You'll hear a lot of buzzwords throughout getting involved in drug trials, and people will talk about adding the voice of the patient. It's not really about adding the voice of the patient. It's about weaving a patient into the DNA of an organization or a trial. We want you guys to get in there and get involved with this because, organizations are doing, a lot of the organizations that are represented here today are doing this really great work, but they need your help, they need your guidance because they don't know exactly what these clinical endpoints are. And so they need that feedback, and they need to know what are the daily pressures that you face. And so as you start to talk to some of the researchers that are doing work in this space, it's so important to share your feedback because they have to know it, because they won't be able to do anything about it if they don't know what they're studying. So we start to look at phase 3 trials. Now, typically phase 3 trials are much bigger trials. They're going to have a lot of patients. They provide reliable evidence that the investigational drug is effective and safe in treatment. And we talk about pivotal trials where now you're looking at marketing a drug, right? So those typically involve, a lot more patients, a lot more trial sites. And when I talk about trial sites, this is where you're going to actually, get the infusion or, whatever type of process it is that they're gonna give you a daily, a PO drug or whatever where you actually eat it versus an injection. There's going to be a lot more trial sites. This process can typically take anywhere from 2.5 to 5 years. Regulatory review of these new drugs should be approved, or hopefully will be approved, but we don't know because we're still looking at the safety and the efficacy of this drug. Typically, the regulators require a drug to demonstrate safety and effectiveness in at least 2 phase 3 trials. And each phase 3 trial can cost anywhere between $17 to $60 million. So remember when we talked about anywhere between $1 to $2 billion in the whole drug development process, a lot of that is just in this phase alone. So a tremendous amount of expense that goes into this. So how this varies for rare diseases, again, we're talking about a much smaller population here. It may not be possible to have thousands of patients. There may not be that many clinicians that actually know about the disease, and I'm assuming that in this community we're facing, there's not probably a lot of patients out there or a lot of providers out there that know a lot about CDKL5. So, there's going to be a lot smaller trial sites and population to actually go to those trial sites. Some of the traditional controls, like use of placebos, may actually be unethical in the phase 3 trials. So the FDA provides regulatory review in the U.S. and can be flexible. Rare diseases are different than mainstream diseases because when you don't have an approved drug for your specific disease, it's important to be a little bit more flexible. So phase 3 participation. Again, it's important for patients to get involved. There's going to be a lot of tests that are going to happen. Researchers are going to be looking at, how your blood reacts. They're going to be doing a lot of different things, a lot of different tests that are going to be going on. Each patient who participates will take the drug and will have routine tests done for a long period of time. Again, often more than 1 year, so these are very long periods of time. Some of the tests may feel uncomfortable or unpleasant, and it could be blood draws, there could be a lot of MRIs and scans like that. I know in the CDKL5 community, I know you're dealing with a lot of the same MRIs that we deal with in the tuberous sclerosis realm. In some of the cases, there may need you may need to stay overnight or stay for a couple of days, or it may be that you have to travel to the site. So these are just some of the things that you need to think about as you get involved in the clinical trial. But the benefits will outweigh the risks typically if you get involved. We want to do something. We can't sit around and not do anything. So the financial assistance is sometimes available to patients to help them cover the cost of participating. That could be travel, it could be your lodging, those type of things. And there are some things that are built into these trials because they want obviously want people to participate. And if people can't get to a trial site, that's a problem. So we want to make sure that patients are actually getting there and that have the resources that they need. So when we look at phase 3 results, all trial sites combine and analyze their results. So all of that information is taken into the actual review and approval of a drug. So information about positive and negative effects of the drug are considered. So all of the things that come out of the trial, if it's good, it's bad. This is why it's so important that when we actually participate in drug trials, that we have good data, that the data is actually honest, that it's unbiased, that, when you actually have any kind of, if you have a side effect of it, that we report that side effect. We want to know exactly what that data is, and it needs to be good data. So roughly about 30% of the drugs in phase 3 trial will still fail. So it's a very high probability still that drugs are going to fail, and each one from going from discovery, typically there's anywhere typically about 10,000 different molecules that'll actually fail out of discovery before you get a couple that'll go into preclinical, and preclinical is where you're testing animals, and then it goes into phase 1 and more failures happen, phase 2 more failures happen, phase 3 more failures, but drugs do get approved, and it's really important, again, to report that honest data. So during the regulatory approval, the FDA, the drug companies actually provide, or they submit what's called a new drug application, an NDA. And these NDAs are very lengthy documents. They can be, 100,000 pages. I mean, this is no joke looking at that image there. I mean, there's can be just thousands of pages of data looking at, the outcomes of the different patients, and they're looking at each patient. What was the result? Did they have an effect? Was it a positive effect? Did they have side effects? Those type of things. And all of that data is actually going into that NDA so that the FDA can actually review it and say this is a drug that we're going to approve or not approve. The NDAs are very complex and, as I mentioned, can be more than 100,000 pages. The review teams assess the applications and listen to patients. That's where, again, they want your feedback. They want to know, is this something that worked for you? Did it not work for you? What were side effects that you needed to bring up with them? Because if it's something that's not working for them, they need to know about it. So patients can participate in the review process. We can submit letters to speak at advisory committee meetings. You can actually participate in these advisory committee meetings. I actually just presented to the FDA a couple of weeks ago for another rare disease where we talked a little bit about a phase 3 trial that they were working on. And so it was actually in a disease state called achondroplasia. And the FDA actually listens to that feedback when you talk to them and you say, this drug is effective, it's not effective. I'm having headaches, I'm having these side effects. Those are things that they take into account as they look to approve a drug. So, it's important to have that patient participation as much as possible. So participating in clinical trials, we've talked a little bit about that, but there's different things that you'll hear a lot about. You'll hear about what are called IRBs, or institutional review boards. The institutional review boards are there to make, they're typically attached to hospitals or healthcare systems, and they're actually looking at, is this a safe drug? What is the protocol for these drug trials that they're actually going to be doing? And they're there to make sure that this is safe and ethical, that, it's not something that's going to put someone in harm's way. You'll hear about informed consent. It's important that you know about what you're doing, what the drug's about, what the possible side effects might be. And so they're going to talk you through exactly what aspects of, the drug, how drugs might interact with you. You're going to know all about how to do the trial and all of that. You'll also hear about inclusion and exclusion criteria. We talked about that earlier. Would you be included because you're of this age or this gender, or your blood counts or this or that, and so you'll be, there's inclusion and exclusion criteria. Some of the questions that as you look to get involved in these, you want to know a little bit about the study. How much are you going to be dosing? Is it going to be something that you have to do an infusion, or you take a daily pill, or those type of things? You want to know a lot about the study. You also want to know about the risks and benefits. Is this something that what are we studying here? Is this something that could harm me, or is it going to be something that, could potentially benefit me, and how long will it take until it starts to actually have some kind of therapeutic effect? You want to talk a little bit about kind of the participation and the care. How are they going to, once you have the drug, how are they going to make sure that you're safe kind of throughout the following, follow-up from, the point where you actually get the drug to the point where you actually are living with the actual therapy. And then they'll also talk to you a little bit about cost issues and, how much it's going to cost to participate in a trial. I mean, there could be costs, and, we need to know that. So, those are things that you want to ask about. Now, super critical to any drug trial, and I want to spend a lot of time on this specific issue, is data collection and data integrity. So some of the things that come up a lot when you're involved in a drug trial are, can I talk to other people in the study? Can I tell Facebook friends about this? Can I write a blog about it, or can I put this on our organizational website? Those type of things. Can I share my experience or results on Twitter or other social media? It is super important that we share only this information with our providers, because when you're sharing it on social media and those type of things, that data can actually get skewed, and so if the FDA is picking up on these things and they see something, it may not be relevant. What the side effect may not actually be related to that drug at all. It may be related to something else. And so it's really important that when you're on a trial that you're not going out and, sharing it with the world, that you're only talking about this with the doctors, because that data has to be, maintained. It has to be collected in a way that is not skewed in any way. So when you get involved in trials, you want to make sure that you're not sharing that information, and so, or you're only sharing it with your providers. And so it's super critical to keep that in mind. It could influence other people on the trial or their perception of side effects and those type of things. It could keep people or volunteers from participating in the study, which happens a lot because people will see, oh, this guy wrote about this and he said it didn't work. Well, I think we all know some drugs will work for some people and they won't work for others. And we need to make sure that, for those that it will help, we want to make sure that they get it and, the information doesn't get out and it actually keeps them away from a drug trial. So you want to make sure that you're really mindful of that. It can influence the public input to regulatory, to, like I said, to the FDA and the feedback that they receive. Because if they start getting all this information that it's not working, even though it really is working for this other population, that may skew the actual approval of that drug. So, just keep all of this in mind as you start to get involved in drug trials or anytime you participate in drug trials, because, again, if this information is getting out and it skews the perception of the patients or the community or anything, that drug may not get approved. People may not get involved. And, it may have actually been a really good drug that actually would have helped a lot of people. So with that, I'm going to leave you with a couple of resources that have really good information. Clinicaltrials.gov will talk to you a little bit about some of the ongoing trials in different therapeutic areas. So if you just go to clinicaltrials.gov, you can actually put in, the actual disease states, and it'll list some of the trials that are ongoing in that specific area. The National Institute of Health has some great resources, and they have an actual site that you can go to, and different newsletters that they send out on a regular basis. Our organization, Global Genes, again, all of our information is publicly available to the community at no charge, so you're welcome to go on there. We also just launched what's called rareuniversity.com, which is an online portal that has different videos on it. And the first video is actually on the drug development process, a little bit about what we talked about today that's a lot more granular. So it's going to get into a lot more detail about what's involved in a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and those type of things. And so if you have an interest in that, it's rareuniversity.com, and you can go on there. Again, all of that information is free. We'll be doing a study or a module next called Genetics 101. And that's really it. And so I'll open it up if anyone has any questions. Okay.
Are you guys listing enrolling trials on Global Genes, like Mondays?
Great question. So we actually are going to start doing that on our new hub that we're going to launch in October. But for right now, for the most part, probably the best place is still clinicaltrials.gov. But our goal is, as soon as we launch our new hub, which we're launching a new website in October around our patient advocacy summit, and we're going to start putting on some clinical trials for rare disease specific on there. Any other questions? Okay. Well, good. Well, if anyone has any questions, you're always welcome to reach out to me or Global Genes, or, we have some of the top thought leaders, I think, in the country actually in this room right now in this specific area. So, by all means, we encourage you to get involved. Marinus is here, Ovid's here. We've got pretty much Amicus and Ultragenics, and all of these companies are here providing really great information. So I highly encourage, get out there, talk to these folks, because these are the people that are going to be creating that next generation of drug that people are going to really benefit from. So thank you for coming. If anyone has any questions or what, I'm going to stay around for a little while, so happy to take any questions outside.